Da skal jeg bare Velkommen til det eventet vi kaller Fremtidens digitale identitet med Norstella og DIN. Dette her blir et veldig informativt og fint event, vil jeg tro. Vi skal gjennom et par punkter hvor vi kjører intro, og så skal vi ha en fin paneldebatt på slutten. Så for å begynne så kan vi ta en liten intro til hvem Norstella. Først vil jeg bare spørre, det noen engelsktalende her, så vi skal holde oss på engelsk, eller fungerer norsk? Rop opp, si noe i chatten, legg igjen en liten...
Du må nesten spørre på engelsk da.
Anyone speaks English who needs everything to be in English, then let me know. If not, we'll try to keep it in Norwegian, even if a lot of text will be in English. Leave a message in the chat or speak up.
Bare hvis du kjører norsk.
Ja. Ingen som var mot norsk, så det fortsetter vi der. Ja, igjen.
Jeg sier 2 ord om Norstella. Først og fremst takk til DIN for initiativ til et sånt felles arrangement som dette her, og hvor også Signicat med og bidrar. Norstella har som oppgave å være med på å bidra til digitalisering i Norge gjennom det å skape møteplasser sånn som dette her, og bidra til økt samhandling på tvers av næringer, sektorer og profesjoner. Vi gjør det gjennom å invitere til åpne konferanser og workshops, og tar initiativet til å etablere nettverksgrupper, og har sånn sett nylig de siste 2 årene med toppleder møteplass. Ja, jeg tror vi skal gå litt mer til, så vi kommer til det som
Ja, men takk for den introen.
Sorry, before we move on, there is someone, it's been written in the chat section that we should take it in English because we have 1 or more participants who don't speak Norwegian. So
I'll do all the next stuff in English, and we will try to cater to that. So, who's DIN? DIN is a digital identity Nordics initiative, which is a non-profit initiative trying to raise awareness of the future of digital identity. We were made about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, and we are trying to have events bringing in international companies and other speakers to raise awareness of what's going on for the future of digital identity. So we focus on the bleeding edge technology mostly, and we're happy that we can do this event with Norstella to bring in technology and discussions that's already happening, like ADAS and other EU initiatives, so we can make a good bridge and collaboration there. So we are a small organization which is non-profit and trying to raise awareness. So the quick agenda, we're just going to go through a super quick framing so everyone understands why we sit here today. Then I will go through a very brief SSI intro so you know what SSI technology is. John will go through an ADAS revision, which will explain to us what is that latest news on the ADAS identity from EU. And then we will have a panel debate where Nina will introduce the panelists, who will also get time to announce themselves and their reason and want to be in this panel. Sounds good. So everyone, at least in Norway, probably knows about this yellow vaccination card. It is something we have had for a long time. It's something I used recently when I traveled to Uganda, that I had to have a stamp for a certain vaccine. This is probably something that could have been benefited from some proper digitalization. And that is part of the use case we're trying to just frame the discussion today. So this is very, very relevant to the biggest discussion these days, which is the corona vaccination passport or certificate, or what you like to call it, which is now everything has to be digital. We need to have a passport to travel and potentially go to events. We don't know yet. It's a lot of up in the air. So why weren't we able to use the yellow card, or why are we going digital? These are questions we're going to try to highlight in the debate. And there is a thought that maybe self-sovereign identity can help doing this if we have a self-sovereign identity infrastructure to move verified data across the digital space. And that's where also there'll be a quick intro to how this works. So this event is going to look a little bit into the future. The corona vaccination passport is being implemented around the EU and the world. But we're going to look into the future and see what happens if you get a new pandemic. Are we going to replicate the current technology, or are we going to start now and make a new infrastructure that can help us move in the right direction? So we want to zoom in and see how can we start steering the boat, a very futuristic, cool boat here, to be able to basically inform and start the thinking and the movement towards the right direction. And what's the right direction? We don't know yet. We'll see based on the panel, but we'll try to work on it. So again, the agenda is like this, and we will do panelist intros, and there is also a live stream that you can watch continuously. When it comes to the first one in Norwegian, when it comes to questions, you can ask them either on the chat or on the YouTube live stream. We will have people who will watch those channels, so we can bring them forth to the panelists. There will be no questions during the intros, so please frame your question with a name or who you want to bring it to, so it's easier for the panel debate leader to bring it to the right person. So we'll keep the questions until we get to the panels, and then you know that you have the possibility to write your question down when you get it into the chat, and we'll bring it along. Sounds good. So we'll jump directly into the first point on agenda, which is the SSI intro, and I'll start with this now. Does everyone hear me well and see the screen? I guess silence is acceptance, so I'll continue. Again, we're here with an event called Fremtidens Digital Identitet, together with Norstella DIN. My name is Snorre. I'm a CTO at a company called Diwala, co-creator of DIN. I'm a decentralized identity nerd, and I believe in a future where you control your data exchange. And you can find my handle here on GitHub and everywhere else. So today's digital identity is pretty much administered by centralized authorities. There's a lot of data that's moving in the wrong direction, and it feels like we have control through OAuth and all these OpenID Connect solutions, where you can basically tell them what you share with you, but in the end, what happens in the back room when they are sharing data, we don't know. You feel like you own the data because you can export, but the exporting from Facebook does not have a lot of value. So it's not optimal. The data exchange today happens with this black hat guy who's an issuer. This is a chaotic picture on purpose because it feels chaotic today. You will receive a digital representation or a physical issuance of data represented by an issuer's database. And then you want to use this data to be able to be verified, access another service or something else. So you basically then go and want to share that data with another party. For that party to be able to verify that data is true, he has to go and request the data from the issuer. We have to accept the data request based on the issuer to be able to then be able to receive the trustworthy data to the service that can then let us in. So this is a lot of arrows in all the directions, and this is basically called a trusted party exchange. And we had one article recently. Don't mind the title, but it's more like this person is not allowed to have bank ID, hence he does not have access to his Corona certificate. Why is it so? Why weren't he able to get his Corona certificate? Because it was behind bank ID login, and could we avoided this in some kind of way? Could this have been done better? Could it be done with delegation or power of attorney or something like that? But again, it was not possible. So we believe that the future should look like this. You are an issuer. That person says, hey, here's your data. You're happy. You can then go to a service and then share that data, which is called in SSI world verifiable credential, and then you share a presentation of it, and then that person can then trust that that data is true and it comes from that issuer, and can move onwards with the service without having to do a lookup to the issuer, because once the data leaves the issuer and goes to you, it is verifiable through cryptography. This is all doable because of a couple of standards. One is called decentralized identifier. I call this the Holy Trinity. You have the verifiable credentials, and there's something called a universal resolver. And then there's a couple of mechanisms in between, certain communications channels between the DIDs and the verifiable credentials, and there's a possibility to have to understand this decentralized identifier. But this whole picture basically creates what SSI is today. I'm just going to do a quick. This is a technical example, and there's come more understandable example later. But DIDCOM in itself is not new. It's not going to recreate the internet. It's just a very small packet that allows you to send data whatever transport of choice, so that you can still work with HTTP, Bluetooth, NFC, notification, QR codes, whatever, because we have very well transports today in the digital world, but we need to be able to transport this certain envelope that is focusing on cryptography. So what happens in the exchange we saw earlier is that you as a person will then tell this issuer where that you can be identified on your decentralized identifier. You can potentially authenticate yourself with earlier issued VCs, and when you have done, they have accepted who you are and they know who you are, they can then issue a new type of verifiable credential and send it to you. So this is a peer-to-peer connection, and you use a lot of attributes to make sure that you are you, they know who you are, they can give you data you want to have. And this is all happening over HTTP or whatever, but it's using, for example, DIDCOM to be able to wrap this into an envelope that people understand. And the same thing happens on the other side. You first initially exchange your decentralized identifiers. You can again authenticate yourself with earlier issued verifiable credentials. And then the service can give you access rights. For example, open a door or even log into service online. But it doesn't matter. He doesn't care what application or tool you use. This person just cares about, are you able to connect with me with your decentralized identifier? You send me some standard envelope. I will get the standard verifiable credentials so I can understand the data. And then I see that this is the data I expected, so I'll give you access. There's a very pretty picture called the VC model, where you basically have the same emoji structure I showed you, but there's a verifiable data registry which you can use for blockchain or something else to maintain identifiers and schemas. We'll go into the schemas in 1 second, but basically the picture is that this is not a centralized database. It can be, but then we're back to square one. So how can we make this layer into something more decentralized? And that's where blockchain usually comes in. But there exists a lot of different solutions. But to be able to build these pictures, we do need standards such as decentralized identifiers, verifiable credentials, DIN for communication. We have one problem with identity today, and that is what I call the semantic problem. In Norway, we have this thing called Felles Datakatalog. It's a registry for all the APIs we have accessible in Norway, and it tells you what type of data or what format you can get the data on, and it tells you how you're supposed to understand the data you get out of this catalog. The biggest problem with this catalog is that it's a first of all, it's an API, so you have to first ask them, okay, how does your data look? How do I understand it, and what format can I get it on to kind of process the data? And semantics is kind of important for everything to move along, because if everyone was creating APIs, it would be very difficult for us to move data between each other unless we had some semantic rules to what does this data mean. So this is where verifiable credential and SSI standards have used some existing standard from Google's time called JSON link data, which creates a context around data blob. What you see here is basically a verifiable credential, and that data blob that was issued and exchanged. You can see here that this has a type. It has a university degree credential, and it has some context to be able to programmatically parse and understand it. And then there's some value in here. And then there's a cryptographic proof, which is crucial for everything to be verifiable. But in terms of semantics, because this has a name, we can now go away, and because we have the standards such as DIDCOM, DIDs, and verifiable credentials, we can now move away from API thoughts into more a thought where we just basically talk semantics. And a really very normal example would be, I'm going to prove to the police that just stopped me that I have a driver's license. And how that exchange would happen is that, okay, the police either comes with their mobile phone who has a QR code, or they come with NFC, or they HTTP is not the best thing here because you have to then get access to that URL, but some way you are making a transport together. You guys exchange your DIDs over DIDCOM, that envelope, and when this is exchanged, you have a cryptographic peer-to-peer connection with this person trying to verify some data from you. Then what the police does is that, hey, you know what? I don't care what kind of application or tool you have on the other side, but just give me the semantic data for driver's license version 1. This is where people now start to talk semantics rather than like, okay, where can I fetch that data? It's like, hey, I don't care where the data comes from, just give me this verifiable credential and I can verify it. So when I get that request, I will go into my own, or use my own tool, look for data I have called driver's license v1, and I'll accept the request because I see it comes from the police. So this can happen in an online environment, or as we just like, it happens in a face-to-face environment here. And then the data is delivered to the police, and they can then verify the cryptographical proof and see that everything is good, nothing has been tampered with. It comes from the right issuer, which is Statens vegvesen in Norway. And all this is just basically known. Because everything the police had to do was just to ask for driver's license V1. This is, of course, a very simplified and easy example, but this is the proof and the hope that we want to come to, because then we can start talk semantics rather than anything else. The second problem is what we call the privacy problem, and that is we don't want to share too much information when we are kind of designing systems that has personal identifier information. We want to disclose only what the other side needs to see. This can be the usual example is you go into a bar, you show that person's your driver's license. That driver's license has a lot of information about you, which that person don't need to see. He just need to be able to verify that you're about 21. But he has to act as identity police to see, okay, do this look true? And then we all know how easy it is to fake a driver's license or scratch a little bit to see that you're above an age, or even use someone else's, and that have worked. So we want to get to a point where, of course, your privacy is preserved, but you can also it's easy to verify you without having to be an expert. That is where you have the name called selected disclosure. Today we do, selected disclosure do happen, but it usually happens through a trusted issuer. For example, not that BankID do selected disclosure, but BankID could be working as an actor who says, yes, this person is above 18 based on our knowledge. So that's a trusted issuer. But what we kind of look for is more the cryptographic solution. We're not going to go into that because that's a lot of math and complexity. But there's one solution that's called BBS plus signatures, which is really interesting. We have a recording of that if you're technologically interested. But what that basically can look like is that when someone is requesting your driver's license, you're gonna book an appointment somewhere, you can basically select what small attributes of this driver's license do I want to show and what do I don't want to show. And then you can basically say, I don't want to show anything, but they can still get the data and the verification that this is a valid driver's license. I don't see anything of the data. And then the question comes into, okay, how do I know that I'm talking to the right person? Then you can say, I request to see your name at least on that driver's license. And then you can basically say, okay, I'll show you my name and nothing else. And then you kind of have been able to verify yourself with a valid driver's license and your name, and then that's it. We're not going to dig into the complexity of how to identify people, but with these tools, I do believe that it's possible to achieve the digital world that we really want to achieve. So I think that was SSI in max 15 minutes. I hope that it made a little bit of sense. I know it's fast. We will have newsletters and in DIN we have newsletters and more recordings on our web pages for you to be able to get more information about it. But it sets a little bit of intro to the panel debate later. So we can go to John now, who's going to tell us a little bit about AIDAS and their latest revision that came out just recently.
Please remember to turn on your camera again. It got disabled for everyone a while back.
Yeah, so here I am, also visible. For once, I was just going to talk this time. No slides, no anything. Just my voice and whatever you can get from listening to me. So, yeah, ADA's European scene, what goes on there? Assume browsing the list of participants, most of you know this. This is the EU regulation, meaning it's a common law across the entire EU on EID and trust services, and it's implemented also in Norway and lov om elektroniske tillitstjenester lately. So this has been was voted in by the EU in 2014. It's been in force for a while, and it has essentially two parts. There's one part on cross-border EID for public services, and there's one part on trust services, which is mainly on signatures and related stuff. And they are quite different because the trust services part, that's based on the treaty on the internal market. So those can be offered freely in the whole EU, while identity is another story. Because you don't have an EU identity, you have a national identity, or one or more national identities. And this is quite, up to now at least, this has been quite strict in the EU that each country controls the identity, and there's no way to make this work cross-border. And yeah, essentially identity in Europe, if you look, there are many differences across countries, but in many countries it's a mess, really. We not mentioning SSI or anything like that. I mean, in the Nordics, we're used to this well-functioning EID infrastructure. Not perfect, as Snorri's Bank ID slides showed, but anyway, for most purposes, it works. Everyone has it, everyone uses it, so that's okay, right? In many other countries, it's not like that. Either you do not have deployed the IDs, or when they are deployed, no one uses them, or both, or yeah. So there's a clear fear in the EU. This is part also of the fight against these big techs, right? Because they're dominating too much. So there is a fear that the Googles and Amazons, maybe Facebook more relevant in this case, will also dominate the identity part, because there's a vacuum in many countries by not filled by government or not filled by any private actors either. The EU is inclined to do something about it, and the initiative was launched now by the revision of the ADAS regulation. We got a draft early June, but actually the warning came in September in Ursula von der Leyen's State of the Union speech, where she said that the EU will soon be launching a digital identity, a European digital identity solution, that will be ubiquitous, available to anyone across the entire EU, and that can be used for anything from paying your taxes to renting a bicycle. So some information slipped out, but with the revision of the ADAS, with the draft revised ADAS, this was officially announced as the EU Digital Identity Wallet. So it's not said that it's not stated that this is an SSI type solution, but it's stated at least that it's SSI inspired. So it goes a long way in the direction of what Snorri has been talking about, but likely not as far as Snorri would like it to go. Maybe some others, but maybe a realistic starting point in this case. So what is the wallet? How do they envisage this to be implemented? Well, it's mainly a mobile application, and they are developing, or they're going to develop, a toolkit. Some state the toolkit will be mandatory to use if you want to implement a European digital identity wallet. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's more like something that's offered that you can use if you don't want to implement your own. I read it a bit like a mobile SDK. service development kit, meaning the wallet is something you get a library code that you can integrate into your app. That could make it useful to current and to facilitate an integration with current identity providers, like you could integrate it in your BankID app, for example, with Bypass app, to mention Norwegian providers. So you would have still your old-fashioned EID, but that could provide an access also to this EU wallet. What is further stated in the proposal is that each country, each member state is responsible for ensuring that there is this wallet is available at national level. So there will be national instantiations and national variants of how this is done, but with some common aspects and some common functionality, and of course also based on common technical standards. So the Commission says to the member states, listen, member states, you are responsible to provide your citizens with a digital identity, and it's going to be like this wallet. It's not the only way you can do it. I mean, the countries issuing identity cards with EIDs, use of BankID, or approved private sector solutions like we have for BankID, for example, that will continue. That's also covered by the revised ADAS, but the wallet is in addition to this. Given that it's an EU initiative, it's clear this is going to work cross-border, right? That's the clear intention. You can use your Norwegian wallet to access services in Germany. That's the intention, clearly. And it's going to be an EID at level high, and it's going to support qualified signatures, not native, but by integrating the qualified signature services in a standardized way. And in the first version, where it comes over to more SSI stuff, it seems like the first direction in this case is what they call attestations. And there will be a set of attestations that each country must provide, and there will be an opportunity to provide more than that. And an attestation in this case is not quite like the SSI type. It's more like a document, like your university diploma, your driving license, or why not your vaccination certificate, right? And it's clear also that the way they want this to be used is that you get your attestation from your university, for example, and it's you control who you release the information to. So the university or the attestation provider shall not know how you use that information, and the receiver can validate it and say, okay, it's you presenting it, and it's clearly the attestation that you have this university degree. So in addition to that, they are also providing, both for this kind of identity and also for other identity purposes cross-border, they're also defining a set of attributes, which just makes sense in this case, because this can also be used to prove your official national identity, right, towards someone else. So that means it must also be able to give your name and your date of birth, your national identity number, and such kinds of attributes. But it's not like this is going to be released everywhere. It's a controlled release, and you will have this kind of distributed identifiers, as Snorre talked about. So what's the infrastructure behind that again? Returning to the trust services part of ADAS, as I said, this is mainly about signatures, and you define currently, or mainly about signatures, and you define this qualified level, which is the super high guaranteed level of a service, going through third-party audits, being supervised, and doing all stuff right. So this is a service that you really, really can trust. That's the idea if it's qualified. Now in the revised ADAS, the interesting thing is that they define, among the new trust services they define, there are two ones that come in handy in this setting. One is a qualified attestation provider. So that means the issuer of these attestations that go into your wallet shall be at, as a starting point at least, at this level, and they shall issue information that you can trust ultimately at this qualified level, and the issuers are supervised and audited, and also the way they obtain the information. Another one is qualified or non-qualified, but qualified ledger provider. So this looks interesting. What? Because self-sovereign identity doesn't have to be built on a distributed infrastructure or a distributed ledger infrastructure. Typically, when you talk SSI, you also talk distributed ledger, but that's not necessarily a link there, but frequently there is a link. But what the EU does is they have established something called the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, which is part of the CEF Digital program of the EU. And here they instantiate national blockchain nodes, sort of controlled infrastructure. So this is you could call it a closed infrastructure, at least at the first stage. Maybe it will be more open later on, but it means if you make a distributed infrastructure for the European wallet, it's not going to rely on Bitcoin blockchain or anything like that. It's going to rely on an ledger infrastructure that's also controlled by the EU. So that's the framework, and setting it up to be able to use highly secure information and highly secure set of stuff like this. So they will be, of course, also open to national editions. Some nations will likely fulfill the minimum set of attestations, which is not defined yet, by the way. And others will use this for more information, and hopefully it will also be open to other kinds of information and evolve towards a more true self-sovereign identity solution instead of this, call it a first trial. So yeah, there are open questions also, because it's going to be changed. The ADAS revision proposal is going to change in the course of negotiation with the member states and all that. But this is going to happen. They have a very optimistic, I must say, time frame, but it's going to happen eventually. It may be later than I would have indicated previously, which would be a 2-year horizon approximately. It's of course a risk that this is going to be a grand failure. They will do it, but no one wants the wallet, no one's going to use it, and no one's going to accept it. But we never know. We got to relate to it anyway. And one open question I would say is, it's a really, really good initiative if you are in a country where there is no EID infrastructure deployed. How this will interplay or maybe even compete with, for example, Bank ID in Norway is, to me, yet an open question. Maybe it will be a merge and a healthy cooperation or living together, or maybe there will be a clash. We'll see. But there are some open issues here. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. I haven't timed myself. I don't know if I used too much time or whatever I did. But
that's good. We are now really good information, John, and I learned a lot based on my I have to be honest now. I stick to the SSI world, and I try to get everyone's comments about the EIDAS comments, and then everyone trying to find like how related is this to SSI, and it's very diffuse. But
it's surely related to SSI, but as they said, it's more SSI inspired in the first run than being what you would define as SSI, I suppose.
Absolutely.
But you're a purist, right?
Yeah. Bitcoin versus Ethereum, isn't it? But yeah, let's move on. Thanks a lot for that information. I hope now that we all have some intro to SSI and EIDAS, and it's time for the panel debate. I'll put my camera on. And it's also
it's time for Mona. No, Naomi.
Yeah. I thought Nina's gonna introduce everyone, and then Naomi's gonna get her time for introduction as well. So just gonna leave it over to Nina now, so she can take the showcase the introductions.
Yeah, hi. Let's just see. Naomi, did you have your camera on already? That's great. I only feel it's fair that you get a few minutes to introduce vaccination passports to the audience here, as it's not necessarily self-explanatory. And then I'll introduce the rest of the people who will be discussing this hot potato. So take it away.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Naomi. I'm a doctoral research fellow at the Norwegian Center for Computers and Law, where I'm writing a thesis on regulation of AI and robotics in the health sector. But I've also, the last months, been working on legal issues concerning Smittestopp and the corona certification. So, the link is not very strong, I feel, to the ID questions and the corona passport. There is certainly something there, because that is one of the issues when it comes to the corona passports, let's call them passports, whether the introduction of such passports, in fact, is also an implicit introduction of an ID duty. So that is a concern that we have raised in the debate. But if we go back to the yellow leaflets that was shown earlier, that is the approved vaccination passport from the WHO. Is used mainly for yellow fever vaccination, but it can also be used for other vaccines, although that is only one which is required for yellow fever. Why isn't that in play now? I don't know. It's mainly possibly because the WHO doesn't want to an introduction of a digital or a general corona passport. They do work on that, and to look at standards and such and whether how a digital version could be. It's mainly driven by countries such as Israel, that was the first one to introduce such a passport, then Denmark, and then the EU. It is it's important to understand that it's not driven necessarily by medical purposes. It's an opening for the economy that is the main driver. And that is something else than the medical purposes. And that is also one of the reasons that there is opposition to the use of vaccine passports. Because what is it really about? When we look at the countries that work on these passports today, it's mainly the rich countries where there is already a high degree of vaccinations. So the concerns that arise from an ethical and medical perspective is that if we introduce these passports broadly and impose a requirement of vaccination, this may also further increase the imbalance between the vaccination degrees between countries. So what we see now with a current report show that with the current pace of vaccination, the rich countries will be done with their vaccination within 6 months, while the poorer countries will be done in 57 years. And that goes into the debate, because if we introduce vaccination passports for corona, which we will use not only for the 12 months that the EU has introduced, but for a prolonged period, that may also lead to further use of vaccines in richer countries, although it's not necessary, only because we want the passports, while the poorer countries that really need to protect their population won't have access. So there are several issues with the corona passports, but I think it's also important to see that there is a difference between the Norwegian debate and the European debate. So the Norwegian passport was introduced a couple of weeks ago, one for domestic purposes. They didn't know what to use it for. They still don't know. They have like vaguely maybe for tour buses and such. And then the travel variation. And here we see that the government is using it as an excuse to uphold restrictions at the border. They wouldn't even let in Danish people with Danish vaccination cards because it was not issued by the Norwegian government. And they wouldn't accept it until the EU infrastructure was in place. But the EU's stance is completely different. First of all, many countries will not introduce these passports. But they will be required to accept the passports as a verification of vaccines or immunity, and they are fine with that. But many countries now still allow people to travel in without showing vaccination. So from the EU perspective, it has been mainly to open the economy and still allow free travel. So the EU regulation says very clearly that you can't, that the purpose of this passport is to still allow free movement. So you can't use the passport to restrict travel, and that is very important. So you can't say no to other EU nationals based on this passport. And that is quite a different narrative. It has also raised very heated debates in other countries because it goes into this debate about a national ID, which many European countries don't have. They have a tradition not to have it. They are very strong opposition against a national ID or an ID card. So that is one. The other one is, of course, the fear of the pressure that lies behind a passport, whether this will lead into a pressure of vaccination. And vaccination is voluntary and it's very much trust-based. So I think another consequence we could see if we link this too much to ID and say that we will use this now to also introduce IDs, that may even fuel some of the skepticism to the vaccinations. If you think of those who are skeptical to the vaccine and worried that Bill Gates has introduced a microchip and that you will get a 5G whatever broadcaster. Well, how will this play if this also leads to, yes, based on this, we will be able to build new EIDs.
All right. Thank you, Naomi. I have the enviable job of translating all this into English from high nerd speak. So I'll try to summarize what I've heard so far. The vaccination card, which is coming now, is the first example of verifiable personal information, which can be shared with users' consent and control. But today, this is done through a QR code, and it isn't connected to any kind of ID. But the Norwegian vaccination card is part of the EU's Green Card initiative, I think, and it fits well with this new vision of an EU digital identity wallet, which could become a common self-sovereign identity solution for Europe. And I'll stop right there, because some will believe that this is utopic. That is completely unrealistic. It will never happen. Others believe that this is an obviously good thing that we should pursue. And others will believe that this is a dystopic scenario that we want to avoid at all costs. And I hope that this rather tabloidized summary sort of sets some direction for the debate. Because I'd like to just introduce the panel here, obviously. We have Snorre DIN, who we've already heard from Digital Identity Nordics and Divala. We have Naomi Lindtvedt, who we've also just heard from, yeah. And Jon Mørnes, who we've also heard from Signicat. Also, we have Kjetil Smith from Crayon, who is the practical technologist of the group and has actually worked with implementing digital identity for hundreds and thousands of people in Norway. So if all of those 4 people can just turn on their camera so we can all see you. And I just remind you all to post any questions you have in the comment section and we will pick it up at the end. Okay, if you guys have all done that, I'd actually just want to give the word to Kjetil, since we haven't heard from you, and you actually are pretty deep into this practically. And that is, what is stopping us from going towards this SSI solution today? It's been discussed for many, many years. If it's, some people believe, an obviously good idea, why does it not already exist?
He's here, but I think he has not unmuted or his camera has not been turned on.
Would you like to answer it for him, Snorre?
I can. Why? What I'm trying to do is then, I feel that there's a lot of potential misinformation of what this will become or what this will be. I am not leaning on my own opinions here. Like, I have a lot of opinions, but I'm also leaning on the opinions of many great companies who's working on this, who's already implementing this, who's putting this into use cases. And what I see is that it's continuously a lot of discussion on why this shouldn't work when there's a lot of proven things of why it works. So I believe it's preferably or mostly just that there hasn't been enough information spreading around how this potentially can work and how it can potentially be implemented as an infrastructure, because there's so much that has to be taken care of. But if we get the information that's in the community I sit in, which is also called the Decentralized Identity Foundation, it's just a global thing, has a lot of the standard writers in it. If all those people were able to get their information collected into a channel that everyone can just consume, I think that this will make a lot more sense. So I think it's just about, to me, it's just about time until we get that information all out to the right people.
Okay. How we have a little problem here with echo. I think Snorre, you need to mute yourself. Yeah. You heard what Snorre just said. How likely do you think this is to happen?
Yeah, it's two aspects I would like to address. One is we could start from the SSI part and good to go to the more principles of the vaccine passports and the like that Naomi raised and you raised also. SSI is, I think, everyone working in identity, to everyone, SSI is the ideal solution, right? It's the way it should be. Problem is making it work technically is also possible. Problem is making it user-friendly because with pure SSI you're on your own, so you control your own identity. And on the extreme side, it could be if you lose your mobile phone, you lose your identity, you have to start again from scratch. Right? Okay, it's not like that, but there are some worst-case scenarios, and users, as my colleague Jon Erik says, users don't even remember passwords. How can you trust them to manage their own whole identity on their own? So this is there are some psychological or user type out of it. The other thing is, if you have a technical solution, if you wanted to fly in real life, you need a business model. If government funding is a business model, of course, but if you make something, I've seen so many identity and other projects that works as they shall in the lab. And if you try them in real life, they fall flat because no one earns money or no one finances the solution. And in some cases, this is also a case. So in short, if you want SSI to happen, you have to make it user-friendly and safe for the user, and you have to make it in a way that someone can earn money on it. Sorry, but yeah, the other one was. The other one was the vaccine passport and some of what you said there, because technically, I absolutely agree with you, Nino, that the vaccine passport is the first example of an attestation, the way I tried to explain it from the EU. You get your vaccine passport from a trusted passport issuer in some country. you can trust the information, and it's you who controls it. You decide who you want to show this passport to, which is the same way as at the station are supposed to be used with the EU wallet. But I mean, this principle, what Naomi started to say is that, does it bring an identification duty? Does it bring a duty to take on that you must have some attributes, and in reality you are obliged to, even though it could theoretically be your free will, but in reality you would be obliged to release the information. We did a joke earlier today, the chlamydia certificate. Is that a chlamydia passport? Is that the next one, right? It could well be, because that's also some information you can get at the station for. Maybe
Absolutely.
it's very far-fetched, of course, but it just sort of pinpoints some of the risks here. If countries insist of you downloading to your wallet all sorts of information that they think you should be able to release to some concerned parties. Yeah.
But let's actually pick up on a point you said, which is there is no business model. And Naomi sent me a link a few days ago from a British case, which with a company called Entrust. And the rather starry-eyed part of marketing director of Entrust said, so they're making COVID passport. They say, with the infrastructure and investment necessary to ensure a viable vaccine passport, why not redeploy this effort into a national citizen ID program? And of course, the reaction from the politicians was, this is Big Brother. We do not want this. So I'd really like to ask, I mean, both, actually now, Kjetil, if you're here, you could answer. Do you think there's a business model for this? And Naomi, are people not being a little bit reactionary here? So Kjetil, if you could go first.
I'm kind of more interested in sort of making a sort of global model where you could actually work on it in a more common sense, so everyone can start off using something, more global kind of thing. And that's why I'm sort of very interesting to work with the major players as Microsoft and Google and that kind of stuff, the biggest cloud vendors out there. So I think it's of course a market, but it should be something that we sort of kind of solve once for all. But you never know.
So yes, there's a business model here.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, Naomi. The second question: Are people not being a little bit reactionary here? Refuse to move past the paper stage?
I find it fascinating now how we are using Corona to accelerate digitalization, which is something I've been working on for, 2 decades. So in a way, I applaud it, but it happens in a bit strange way. I don't know if it's the actors or what's happening, because there is a rush for digitalization, but maybe possibly not without the understanding of the infrastructures and the registries you need to have in place, how it influences behavior and how it influences society. It's also very interesting, for example, if we go back a few steps to the the contact tracing apps, yes, like Smittestopp, it's very interesting to see how that evolved. And the interesting thing is that there was use of similar digital tools during both the SARS epidemic and Ebola, but there seems to be no uptake of the experience they did during those epidemics. So it seems that the initiatives we have seen recently just like starts anew and not looking back and what did we learn. So that's interesting, I find. So yeah, so I'm not going to be, a particular when it comes to digitalization and Corona, but maybe we did focus on the wrong things, on those that seem fun or very much actually driven by the business actors, but because there are lots of business models in these. So, for example, if you look at a company which is developing or providing some consultation services to FOE for the Corona passport, the Danish net company, which also made Smittestop. In the promotion material, because they are trying to get into other markets, other countries, they have a much more extensive model. There they propose to have a link to to the passport registry and to link the passport to your passport photo, for example. So yes, so we should underestimate the rush to market, that is. So many of the initiatives we see are driven by the market, and then of course there are some public authority players who are also willing to play, but maybe we do play in some of the wrong areas. It could be interesting experiences if they could only learn from their experience. I think that would be valuable. Instead, they seems like a bit headless sometimes, but otherwise, massive amounts of case studies that you can do on this pandemic.
I'd like to give Snorre the chance to reply, but first, I just want to ask you, what lessons are we failing to pick up from the past?
How digital tools, an app is not an app, it's not a silver bullet. You can't just release it and expect it to work. You need to look at what you need around it to make it work. For example, Smittestop, the app, the new one, has been downloaded 1.5 million times, I think, but only used for notification by 3,400 people, for example. So that has to how it has been designed and how it's being used. While you could, and someone said, it doesn't matter, we learn a lesson. Yeah, but we spent like 140 million kroners on that. We could have instead made digital tools for the contract tracing teams in the municipalities that would really have had added value to their work. It would also have been a driver for their digitalization within the health sector, and not to mention the interaction between the municipal and the state level. So it's just an example of how the priorities we make will also influence but if we go back to Ebola and such other tools they did make a lot of experience there when it concerned trust, privacy, ethical issues, and they were not picked up in these rounds. We did the same mistakes again.
Snorre?
Yes, I just want to kind of put in here that one thing we learned from being in Uganda, Douala in Uganda. So that's our main market. We see how much difficulties keeping your data on paper is creating for everyone. So yes, we all agree that digitization is important, but again, you raise the question like, okay, what made this rush to digitization when it comes to vaccination passport? Because people were maybe afraid of everyone dying, but we see in daily life that there's so much issues with being raised because people struggle to kind of have to have things on paper, and there's so much hiccups because of that. And we also see that how much we are implementing SSI in Uganda, and we see how much this is actually benefiting certain ecosystems, and we are trying to approach it in a way that, hey, we are not the centralized source of truth there. We're just enablers for issuers and verifiers to trust each other. Meaning that, hey, there's a doctor issuing a vaccine, and he says, hey, I gave you a vaccine, here's a stamp of approval that you can bring somewhere else. And then you can take that digitally and showcase it where it's needed. I completely support everything that has to do with, we're not going to create a dystopia where you are going to go into a restaurant and you cannot go in there because it's a singles bar, so you have chlamydia and then you cannot come in. I don't support that at all, but it's more like we are lacking some kind of infrastructure in the bottom here that allows us to use digital identity in the way it's supposed to be. Because today, digital identity lives in silos within organizations or within Facebook or within Google. And if we have a good infrastructure, we're able to tackle digitalization in a more privacy-preserving manner than we are currently today. So that's why I truly believe that if we are able to fund the future of this infrastructure to put in a standardized way, we can be able to tackle certain problems, but in a good way that Naomi, like you wanted to things to be.
Yeah, Naomi, I guess you can answer, but can you also answer at the end whether you think that some of the criticism against these future models is that we view things through the current lens of identity, which all its flaws and imperfections? But yeah.
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting, as I mentioned, how now, yes, I agree. The paper is not necessarily the solution, but I find it fascinating that now paper is not even worth anything. So, so instead of, for example, recognizing paper vaccination certificates from the US, where there is a very high degree of vaccination, it's very easy to, everyone can get it, then we insist on a digital solution being in place, because without a digital, we do not want to recognize their paper certificates because we think they can be easily forged. And we all know that, of course, all digital solutions have their vulnerabilities. So that is a fascinating way, and I think we have to accept that paper will have to live on, at least when it comes to some health issues, due to the differences in the world when it comes to how advanced they are, both in the health systems and registries and so on. So I think we should just be wary not to use this as an excuse to exclude groups or people, or not, or make things too complicated for ourselves, because there are complications with making digital solutions on this as well. When it comes to the identity part, well, the identity question hasn't been that much such a huge question surrounding the well, I'm contradicting myself, because yes, there is an identity part to the Corona passport, which has been part of the discussion, which has also led then to how there is the information embedded in a passport should be reduced, even the identity information. So if you look at the EU standard, it's very clear: only name and date of birth, nothing else. And of course all the health data then, but so it's quite, and then they say this is sufficient, we do not need anything more, we do not need this very close tie to your identity. And it is a way of trying to solve the European puzzle, because the European puzzle is much more complicated than we see here, because we are so used to our identity number and throwing it around and using it for everywhere, and we think that everyone else has it like that, but they do not. So so I don't think the identity question will be such a huge part of the Corona passport discussion. Actually, it will be, it is going to be more about, should we use it, what should we use it for, how do we actually enable to use this for the limited time we promise to do it, so that we do not introduce it as the new normal, that I always have to tell people if I'm vaccinated, for example. I mean, we do not use any other vaccination information actually in any circumstances, except the yellow fever when you enter into some countries. So that is also, I think that question is going to be more predominant. That is the kind of the global question.
I see you want to ask Snorre, but I want Jon to answer something first. And since you sit in the middle of a lot of these EU discussions, is there a kind of you have to use my standard, or whatever you have is not valid? Like your example, Naomi, with the US vaccination being completely unrecognized here. Is there a danger we just don't recognize any other standard than our own?
Absolutely. I've advocated that actually at the EU level. If you're looking at electronic signatures, well, you have the ADOS regulation, you have a common European framework, and there is a paragraph in there that under certain circumstances you can recognize third country solutions, third country signatures in that case on par with European, and not even Switzerland has managed to release anything out of that paragraph, even though they've tried. So what I've claimed many times is that we've moved from national islands to an EU island in this case. And it seems like, yeah, for a starting point, it's the same on the vaccination passport, right? Although there are global initiatives that hopefully will be linked into this if you need something. I mean, over time, yellow fever is obviously a much more relevant case than corona, if you want to look at vaccine passports. Could I join in? Also, I mean, Frank asked the questioner in the chat, is the business model for the global companies for the identity part? And yeah, that's completely different, right? Because remember, if you look at Facebook, remember, you are not Facebook's customer, you are Facebook's product. Which is completely true, because what Facebook makes a living from is to sell your identity to whoever pays them for advertisements and other stuff, or for targeting political propaganda meant for you, or whatever bad things could happen. But in that case, it makes, of course, perfect sense for Facebook to try to grab as much of the identity as possible and even give it away for free, because they earn more money on the other end by using that as a product. To put it that way, Bank ID won't do that, right? It's not their business model is selling identity, and this is so. Yes, as said, an identity solution in real life needs a business model, and for Facebook and Google, at least, that business model is pretty clear. They want to grab your identity and sell it on to their customers.
Naomi needs to go now. So if you just want to have some final words.
I'll just say, thank you. I think it will be interesting to follow this debate further on and to see how things evolve. And I would just maybe only encourage you to actually take part in that debate, especially if you see that things are going astray. It has proven to be very important for the civil society to engage in these questions, and especially from the tech community. So I mean, that is my final word to not only for the ones, the things that you are enthusiastic about and want to happen, but also when you see some flaws in the arguments or the deployment of tech. I think that it has proven to be a very, very important voice. So thank you. I need to run.
Yeah, I will reply to Naomi, but you can look it on recording. So thank you for showing up, and I will. You can have my reply then. So have a good day.
Snorre, you have your hand up. What would you like to say?
Yes, I want to kind of go into that aspect of. She was talking about why is ID important in this exchange. And I would like to go more into business models afterwards, but why isn't ID important? And that is like, when I take my yellow vaccination passport or corona passport and show it to someone, that person will be like, okay, I see that the name of the person of this holder and ID or a date of birth is X, but I don't know that the person I'm actually talking to is the actual person that is presenting me this data. So how this is then probably have to be verified is that, oh yeah, show me your driver's license so I can see that you are actually the right holder of this data that you're presenting. So I just, like, I have no idea how ID cannot be part of this discussion, because you have to prove that you are the right holder of the data you're presenting, even if it's just on paper or whatnot. And that is where I do believe that SSI is completely just solving everything, because it's using cryptography to just make a binding between the person that's going to verify something and the person that's going to present something and say, hey, this is our binding. I'm now going to show you some data to you so you can see that based on the binding we have made, you can see that I'm the rightful holder of the data I'm presenting to you. And when you ever see that data, you can then just verify it and not receive, like, we come back to selective disclosure, like, you don't see all data, you just see that, oh yeah, you have a valid green check mark, valid corona certificate, because there's an understanding that the binding happening between you is actually a truthful binding, and based on that binding, the data you're receiving belongs to the person you have binded to. And this is so important, because that is basically what we talk about ID, that there's a binding happening, and this can all be done because of digital tools with cryptography in a very more efficient way. And that's when we kind of talk about the SSI world, that cryptography moves to the leaf nodes. And yes, I understand John's concern about it's complicated for everyone to hold their keys. But again, there can be service providers just enabling your keys some way. We're not going to go into that discussion, but it's just that I think it's wrong to say that ID is not important in an exchange of this type of data.
Not everyone knows what leaf nodes is. Just remember, please ask questions in the comments and tell me who you want the question asked to.
To jump in, I mean, ID is,
yes.
of course, it's important. It's what you do, but it's about you're setting up the ideal situation, right? And we should try to get there. If someone checks my vaccine passport, they don't need to know who I am, my name or age or anything. They need to know that this is the valid vaccine passport and it belongs to me. And actually, it's the same with a driving license. If someone stops me to check if I'm allowed to drive this car I'm driving, they just need to know that I got that authorization, that it's linked to me. They don't need to know my name or anything else apart from that, essentially. So if we can move identity in that direction, sort of a minimal disclosure way, it's the right way. And yeah, we're heading that direction, I hope. But you got a strong guys like Facebooks and Googles that are heading in the entirely opposite direction, because they want to maximize maximum disclosure solutions, right? So this is, I think this there is an area here there where we'll see some big fights in the upcoming years.
We have an interesting question from Jon, possibly Jon Arve. And it's directed to Snorre. How do you protect against certificate lendouts? Only keys bound to biometrics are protected against lendouts.
Absolutely, and that is the hardest question here, is that in the end, it's only biometrics that connect users to the digital world. But I cannot answer. I don't have a good answer to that. I can only say that we have now built it. A lot of the phones we have today, they're just a validated data. I can't even say the word. But you identify yourself locally there to unlock something locally to then move onwards into the world. So it's easy for someone to log in with a biometric imprint instead of, or when the bank doesn't have to know about your biometrics. And we can start to build out cases where, okay, for me to validate that you don't have someone else's keys. There has to be some biometric binding towards the service you provide the key with. But again, I'm not an expert in that area. I know that that is a very, very touchy subject, and I know that that is if we solve that problem, the person connected with the digital world would have been solved. Yeah, I'm an optimist and not a purist. I'm purist towards SSI in a way, but I'm optimist as well. So I believe that give it time and money, we will find a way to kind of put that in place. We've been on a digital world in global sense like the last 16 years. We have been on the computer, but I would say that really expanding things will happen in the last 15, max 20 years.
We should jump to the next question, and it's directed to you, Snorre, but I want Jon to answer it because I think, well, that's a long. It's from Espen Winterø Øyslebø. Can a European ID be used to bootstrap a self-sovereign identity? So with my digital government, I can certify that a self-sovereign identity is associated with me.
Yeah, I think it's a valid approach. Don't know if I need to say more than that. I think it's something you could say is possible because you have other issues, right, with your self-sovereign identity system. It's as strong as the quality of the credentials you put in, and one of the credentials is your base identity, so to speak. In Norway, it would be your identity as you're registered in the people in the population register. And to prove that, to bootstrap it, you could use it. You could use an ID that way, right? And you add on further attributes and further way, and the point is you control it yourself. That's so there are some.
If it's possible.
If it's possible, yeah. Yeah, it's possible. And another one is this on. Do you authenticate the person or the device? I mean, what we have in reality with our mobile phones now is we have each of us a device that is trusted and that is representing us in the digital world. That's what happens. And you could claim that today's phones are not sufficiently secure, nor tailored, nor built with that abstraction in mind, but it is really what happens. Some way I'm the physical person. I'm able to open my mobile phone, and my mobile phone has all these crypto keys and EIDs and whatever that in turn represents me in the digital world. So that's sort of the way of thinking in this case also, and it's the same with the wallet, right? I'm my physical identity. I can open my identity wallet. I can use the information in there and release it to my counterparts.
Jon, I have another question for you. It's based on what Naomi said earlier. How do we ensure that if we were to build this, and it seems like there is a great interest to build something similar to this from a lot of commercial and government actors, how do we ensure that there is not a legitimasjonskrav? There's that it's obligatory to use, so to speak, you know? And actually back to our chlamydia example, you know, how do you ensure that if you build this thing that can tell people if you have it or not, that it won't be obligatory, you know? How do you ensure that?
That's not a technology question, right? That's a social, political, or society question, and relates to what Marcus states also in the chat, right? No idea about this. No discrimination. It's not like in reality you're forced into having a vaccine passport because that's the only way you can get around that huge queue. And yeah, it's so there are ways of doing it.
Okay, we're out of time.
It's more, we could discuss a lot about it. I think
And we will.
leave it at there. Yeah.
I want to give each of you guys a chance to not tell about your hopes for the future, but about your realistic and sober expectations for the future before we sign off at 5:30. So Snorre, maybe you can just start.
Yeah, I said I was an optimist, but I do know that this is going to take time. I know it's going to be a long time before we see this digital utopia. I hope, after reading Elon Musk's Neuralink experiment, I think he's already 50 years ahead of us, but he's going to be like, oh, we can soon talk to each other just with brainwaves. But again, for the identity world, I think that the next 10 years or this decade will have identity focus. We're not going to see SSI wallets within this year, potentially not maybe next year. The EU are pushing for it, but it will probably have its drawbacks of centralized sources, and maybe that's where we end up going. But I'm still an optimist, and I think we'll be able to go this way. OpenID Connect was once created to open up the ball for everyone. It was eaten by Facebook and Google, and that's where we ended, because users are users. They want it easy. There's now another rush and wave that's trying to make sure that we open it up for everyone, now with a new tool that we didn't have before, and that was blockchain. So I'm optimistic, but I think it's going to take a long time, and that's why I'm still here in DIN and pushing the message. Hopefully we'll get some research money and other parties into working on this and making it a clearer picture.
Okay. Jon?
Yeah, I think possible to hook on to what Frank just wrote in the chat, thoughts on the digital identity wars. Tech giants, banking nations, EU, whatnot. I feel pretty confident that the big techs will not be the identity providers of Europe, especially with the moving. There's too much political attention now on hindering that. I don't think it will happen. If you look at nations and commercial actors, it's more open. But that's Europe, right? Europe is the regulator of the world. It's the most well-regulated, for good and bad, I assume, area of the world. And you see in many cases also that other parts of the world try to pick up on regulations, like in EID and Trust Services cloning ADAS into their national legislations. But I'm still not confident what will happen in the rest of the world. If this is something that will be too much big tech dominated, I hope not. I really hope not. And I hope also it's not only Europe that's going to fight those monopolies and what they do to identity, because that's really scary, actually. That. You outsource your entire identity to these guys that sell them, and that based on that information is able to facilitate anything from political propaganda to marketing. We don't want it that way. We really, if we think it over, we don't want it that way. We want something else, and we want it to move more in the direction that Snorre wants it to be, right? So
we're not finished.
We'll see. We'll see, right? It's still open. There's lots of exciting stuff.
One last
We are out of time here.
Okay,
just one last quote.
Sorry, I can speak for ages.
If identity follows the way that money did, cryptocurrency, they will live on its own if it's able to implement it in a way that works. But we don't know. Suddenly something happened within the 5 years.
Yeah.
Marcus, do you have something eating you? No? Okay. Wow, we managed to hold on to 18 out of 22 people. That's pretty, this must have been a pretty interesting debate. Nils Inge, I don't know if you have any final words, or Snorre, before we say thank you and farewell.
We're just thank you. We had 10 people watching live stream as well, so it's been a good crowd. There will be a recording of this, so we will have it on DIN, and it's shareable if you guys thought this is something you wanted to share with your colleagues or other friends who care about this subject. So please, let's spread the word together. Let's make this story true, and let's find a good mediator way that works for both, for everyone, in as long as we can, until we have to make a choice.
And a huge respect to you, obviously very competent people with all your amazing insight. It's been a pleasure listening in for the part that I did. Thank you very much.
Thank you for interesting presentations and good discussion. We will get back beginning of September with another topic on the IDAS.
All right. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks for showing up, guys.
Bye.
Bye all.